Max's jaw tightened. I didn't realize she went with anyone. Sheffield cleared his throat, clearly sensing the tension. Well, I hope you'll both join us. It would mean a lot to Talia, and to myself. Max forced a polite smile. Thank you, Byron. I'll speak to Lori about it. Back in his truck, Max stared through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. A heaviness settled in his chest. Lori hadn't mentioned a gallery outing, let alone with an art dealer. Was it simply business, or something more? Max shook the thought away and started the engine. The sights of Albany's historic neighborhoods rolled past as he drove home. He remembered driving these very streets as a young man, windows down, full of hope for the future. Somewhere along the way, that hope had grown muddied with doubt. When Max pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting a golden hue across the home he'd painstakingly built from the ground up. Inside, the house felt unusually quiet. Caleb's bedroom door was closed, music softly leaking through. Lori sat in the living room, sketchbook open on her knee, but she didn't look up. Max dropped his keys on the table. You called? He asked, voice soft but carrying an edge. She kept her eyes low. We need to talk about Caleb's tuition, and about us. Max sat across from her, exhaustion weighing on him. Let's talk then. The silence stretched, filling the space between them. Finally, Lori spoke. Everything feels wrong, Max. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine. So am I, he admitted. She closed her sketchbook. I want to find happiness again. I want us both to. Max looked at her, searching for the warmth that used to be there. Do you think we can? Lori's answer was barely a whisper. I wish I knew. They sat together in silence, the distance between them deeper than ever, as the last light faded outside. She crossed her arms, her voice cool. It was a business thing, Max. Talia wanted me to meet a dealer from St. Louis. Honestly, I didn't think it mattered. Max looked at her steadily. Why wouldn't it matter? You didn't mention going with someone else, or even being invited. She sighed, carefully setting down her purse. I didn't want you to overreact. It was just a meeting, Max, networking for the gallery. He shook his head, frustration simmering. It's not just tonight, Lori. You're gone more and more. It feels like you don't want to be here anymore. Lori's gaze softened briefly, but she looked away. Sometimes, I don't know what I want. Then tell me, Max pleaded. We used to talk about everything. Now, I don't even recognize us. She shifted, her stance uncertain. Max, I can't do this right now. I'm tired. I need to think. She turned toward the house, pausing at the door. We'll talk in the morning, okay? Max watched as she disappeared inside, her silhouette framed in the soft glow of the living room lamp. He was left alone in the garage, thoughts swirling, the chasm between them wider than ever. Lori forced a smile. It is. Lots of moving parts, though. Takes up more time than I'd hoped. Caleb glanced between his parents, sensing the tension, but choosing to stay quiet. He scooped another forkful of mashed potatoes and returned to his phone. Max set down his glass. Just so you know, I'll be leaving early tomorrow for a job out in St. Louis. He locked eyes with Lori. Big project. Won't be home till late. She blinked, caught off guard. You didn't mention that before. He shrugged. Last-minute opportunity. Sometimes you just have to seize it, right? Lori hesitated, chewing her lip as if wanting to say more, but decided against it. Just let me know if you'll be home for dinner, she said dismissively. Caleb pushed back from the table. I've got homework. "Caleb?" Lori called, but he was already headed up the stairs. After a moment of silence, Max stood and cleared his plate. "Thanks for dinner." He walked into the kitchen, putting everything away methodically, his mind working through what to do next. The walls of their home, once filled with laughter and hope, now echoed with secrets and silent accusations. Max knew the truth, but the hardest part was figuring out what to do with it. The pain of betrayal gnawed at him, mixing with a simmering anger. He wasn't sure when, or if, he and Lori could find their way back. Max set his keys on the counter, feeling an unnatural calm settle over him. "All right, let's talk," he replied, matching her formal tone. Lori took a breath. "This isn't working anymore, Max. It hasn't been for a long time." Caleb avoided his father's gaze, staring at the marble countertop. Lori continued, "I'm moving forward with a divorce. I've met with an attorney and filed preliminary papers." Her eyes watched for any reaction, but Max's face remained unreadable. "You've made all these plans," Max said quietly. "Did I ever have a say in any of it?" Lori hesitated. "We've talked so many times about our problems. You refuse to change. I can't keep living this way." "Is it really about change?" Max's voice was steady, but his hands trembled just slightly behind his back. "Or is it about Brody Harrington and his promises?" Caleb's head jerked up. "Dad, don't make this ugly." Max met his son's eyes with a sadness deeper than anger. "You think I haven't seen what's happening?" He turned to Lori. "You spent years turning us into a business transaction. You talk about what I haven't given you, but you never bothered to see what you already had." Lori's lips tightened. "You're not being fair, Max." "Fair?" he echoed, his voice sharpening. "You want half of everything I've spent my life building. You want the house, custody. You want to walk away from your part in what broke this family and leave me with the ruins." "We're done, Max," Lori said with finality. "You'll be hearing from my attorney." For a long moment, the kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Max straightened, resolve settling over him. "Whatever happens next, I'm protecting what matters most. I won't just stand by while you tear down everything we built together." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Lori and Caleb behind in the cold light, both realizing that the end had truly begun. Max stared at the envelope, his jaw clenched. He forced himself not to flinch. "Best for everyone? You mean best for you and Brody?" he said quietly. Caleb huffed, folding his arms. "You wouldn't understand, Dad?" Max looked them both over, feeling a hollow ache where his heart had been. "You're right about one thing. I don't understand. I don't understand how you can burn down everything we've built and call it progress." Lori's lips trembled, but she pressed on. "We deserve a new start, Max. This isn't working." "It hasn't for a long time." Max nodded. "You made mistakes. So have I. But I always put this family first. I will not let you erase me from Caleb's life or take everything I've worked for without a fight." Lori exhaled, her composure faltering. "We're done here. Caleb, get your things." Caleb shot Max a stony glare, then brushed past him and trudged upstairs. Max remained still, whiskey glass in hand, as if rooted to the tile. Lori gathered her purse, avoiding his gaze, and followed Caleb up the stairs. The walls, once witnesses to laughter and life, now stood silent, heavy with heartbreak. The door eventually closed behind them, the sound echoing through the empty house. Max's shoulders sagged as he stared at the envelope on the counter, final, cold, and unforgiving. In that heavy silence, he vowed to fight for what mattered, no matter the odds. Even if Lori petitions for full custody, she can't touch the principal or any assets held there, Bennett affirmed, sliding a notarized document toward Max. You protected Caleb's future. Max nodded, a spark of grim satisfaction flickering in his eyes. No matter how angry he is, he'll still have something solid to stand on when he's ready. Bennett leaned back in his chair. Lori will have a tough time contesting any of this. You were thorough. The documentation is airtight. Dates, signatures, the justification for every action. The court will see this wasn't some last-minute attempt to hide assets. Max clasped his hands together on the table. It was all built step by step. I anticipated this day, even if I prayed it would never come. Bennett watched Max, his tone gentle. You're a builder, Max. You know how to reinforce foundations. This might be the toughest project you've ever faced, but you're ready. Max glanced at the folders, a mixture of sorrow and resolve on his face. All that's left is to watch it unfold, to see if all the careful planning was enough. As Bennett gathered the documents, Max stood, the hollow weight in his chest matched only by his determination. If he was losing his family, he would keep his dignity, his business, and the legacy he'd built with his two hands. The battle ahead would be hard, but Max was no stranger to hard work. And this fight, he vowed, would be the one he finished to the very end. He's been buying up parcels through shell companies, setting himself up to be the main supplier for the center, Ryder explained, zooming in on scanned property records. If he lands that contract, he'll make a fortune, and everyone else who gets in his way, well, he's not above pushing a little too hard. Max absorbed the data, eyes fixed on the mosaic of photographs and documents in front of him. Does Lori know any of this? Ryder shook his head. Doubtful. He keeps his cards close. From what I've seen, he also feeds her just enough hope, lets her believe she'll run the East Coast Gallery. But in every case, the new woman gets sidelined once he's leveraged her contacts and reputation. Max clenched his fist, feeling equal parts rage and grim determination. If she and Caleb have staked their futures on this man, they need to know what kind of person he really is. Ryder slid a secondary file across the table. Everything's here. Photos, timelines, even anonymous statements from women he's left behind. Some are willing to talk, if prodded. Might be useful if you take this to court, or other channels. Max nodded, tucking the drive and file safely away. Good work, Ryder. I'll handle the next move carefully. Ryder's expression turned wary. Just be careful, Max. Don't let anger write the blueprint. Use this smart. Build your case, not just your revenge. Max managed a tired smile. You know me. Measure twice, cut once. No noise, just results. He left the building with the evidence in hand, clouds gathering overhead. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of control. Max knew the next phase demanded restraint and planning, not rage. And if he had to dismantle everything around the man who'd torn his family apart, he would do so with the same precision he brought to every job, ensuring that no one, not Brody, not Lori, not even Caleb, could ignore the hard truth when it came to light. Ryder chuckled softly, respect in his eyes. That's the spirit, Max. I'll dig deeper, but keep your phone close. If anything feels off, anything at all, you call me. Max nodded. I will. And Ryder, follow the money. If Westfield or Harrington are cutting corners, bribing officials, or using shell companies for kickbacks, we need hard evidence. Something that won't just make them uncomfortable, but bring down their whole operation if exposed. I've got a couple of trusted sources at City Hall. "Leave it with me," Ryder said. "But remember, Max, if you push too fast, they'll close ranks before you can finish your blueprint. Let me work quiet." Max's voice was low but determined. "I don't care about their feelings. I care about the truth." Ryder's eyes narrowed. "So what's your end game?" Max exhaled slowly, surveying the tangled web of relationships on the wall behind him. "Expose them. Kill Harrington's sweetheart deal, take down Westfield's leverage, and make sure Lori and Caleb see the true cost of chasing empty dreams." "I'm not fighting for revenge, Ryder. I'm fighting for my name, my business, and what's left of my family. They call me stubborn, but I call it standing my ground." Ryder gave a thin smile. "Then let's build this carefully, Max. Brick by brick." As Max left the building and stepped into the quiet night, he no longer felt powerless. He felt the steady pulse of purpose in his blood, the determination of a man who would not let his life, no matter how battered, be written off by wealth, betrayal, or anyone's gilded promises. The coming battle would be fought in boardrooms and back offices, in whispers and paperwork. But Max was ready. This was the project that mattered most, and he would see it through to the very end. Max carefully documented every meeting, every whispered request, and every sudden donation traced back to Harrington's network. Patterns began emerging. Select committee members received exclusive invitations to previews at Lori's gallery, followed by generous campaign contributions from shell entities linked to Westfield Group. He spent late nights in his workshop, a wall now covered in flowcharts and red string connections, cross-referencing property acquisitions with campaign filings and permit decisions. His meticulous approach, honed from years spent overseeing construction down to the last nail, became his greatest weapon. Harrington and Lori, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the gathering storm. The glossy world they inhabited was flush with opening galas and whispered promises about a legacy that would change Albany forever. Caleb, starry-eyed by the access and opulence, drifted further toward Harrington, latching on to dreams not built, but bought. Max focused his energy, determined to protect what little he had left. He reached out to old friends in the local builders' union, sharing concerns in measured tones. He brought coffee to late-working inspectors, casually mentioning his interest in keeping the permitting process fair and by the book. Hints about unusual pressure from well-connected newcomers started to circulate. It wasn't anger driving Max now. It was resolve. If the system was being pushed for profit at the expense of the community, he would shine a light on every shadowy deal. If they wanted to erase his name from the city he'd helped build, they'd have to fight for every inch. As the zoning board meeting approached, Max felt ready. He might be the only one standing up against Harrington's polished lies and Westfield's hunger for control, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. The city he loved still had people who valued truth over slick profits, and Max, battered but unbroken, stood as a quiet force of resistance, intent on proving that sometimes an honest man who refused to give up could change the course of ambition and greed. Community groups were demanding transparency, protesting the shadows where money changed hands and deals were struck. Allegations circulated of city favoritism, insider negotiations, and special tax breaks for wealthy developers. Max watched as the cracks began to show. Reporters lingered at City Hall, chasing leads on the cultural center and the controversial gallery contract. One particularly dogged journalist, Mia Ferris, quickly caught Max's attention. She attended every zoning board hearing, asking pointed questions about campaign donations and real estate transactions too slick to be coincidence. It was at one of these hearings that Max quietly slipped her a sealed envelope. Anonymous documents he'd painstakingly compiled, including evidence of the Torres art purchase and hidden campaign contributions funneled through shell companies. Mia's eyes widened as she scanned the contents, and Max saw a new determination flicker across her face. Within 2 days, Ferris's expose hit Albany's news circuit. The article detailed the questionable sale of Torres's daughter's art, the money trail from Harrington to city officials, and the sudden shifts in zoning board sentiment. She never named her source, but the truth was clear enough. The community's response was immediate: outrage at the idea that a few well-placed bribes could dictate the city's future. Harrington's carefully crafted narrative of cultural renewal began to unravel. Calls for Councilwoman Torres's recusal rang out from both activist groups and political rivals. Under mounting pressure, Torres reluctantly stepped down from voting on the variances central to the cultural center. Meanwhile, Harrington and the Westfield Group scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements denying any wrongdoing. Lori, still appearing at Harrington's side, was notably less visible, her usual confidence dulled by the swirling controversy and rumors now shadowing every public appearance. Max, watching it all unfold from the edges, felt a fierce, quiet satisfaction. With a single, careful strike, he'd shifted the balance of power. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The zoning board vote approached, and the city buzzed with uncertainty and unease. For the first time, Max believed that Harrington's empire, built on charm, secrets, and influence, might finally be showing its first fatal cracks. Brody pushed past the cameras, jaw tight, offering only a terse, "No comment," as Lori hurried after him, her eyes darting between the reporters and her partner. Caleb was nowhere to be seen. Inside their borrowed luxury, Brody vented his anger at the disrupted narrative, the headlines already spinning the evening's events as a scandal rather than a celebration. Lori sat rigidly in the passenger seat, the shine fading from her newfound world. As news of the hearing spread, the city's conversation changed. What had once been a seamless campaign for progress and revitalization was now shadowed by words like corruption, conflict of interest, and cronyism. The mayor's office released a cautious statement promising full transparency and the highest ethical standards. Several city council members, eager to distance themselves from the controversy, called for a wider audit of all recent major redevelopment projects. Max saw the shifting tide in every conversation he overheard at hardware stores, coffee shops, and union halls. People weren't buying Harrington's story anymore. The city had become hungry for accountability, skeptical of easy answers and grand promises made behind closed doors. Late that night, Max received a message from Bennett. "This is working. Keep your head down. They're rattled." Max smiled for the first time in weeks. He was under no illusions that happy endings were guaranteed, but the possibility of justice, of thwarting those who tried to rewrite the city on their own terms, felt closer than ever. And as Albany buzzed with rumors and revelations, Max returned to his workshop, steadied by purpose. The foundations of what he cared about most, his name, his work, and maybe, with time, his fractured family, were no longer shifting beneath his feet. For the first time in a long while, he could see the outlines of a future rebuilt on truth, resilience, and quiet, hard-won hope. Max leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "You may not care much for my work truck or my calloused hands, but those things represent more than just hard labor. They represent stability, the kind you'll appreciate when people stop giving handouts, and you have to stand on your own." Caleb looked away, jaw clenched. If you need money for a legitimate school expense, I'll help, but it'll come from your trust. Remember, you can't access most of it until you're 25, and only for education or starting something real, not for appearances or status. Max's voice was firm but not unkind. Caleb nodded stiffly. I'm disappointed in what you said before, about being embarrassed by the life I gave you. I worked for all of it, Caleb. Maybe someday you'll see the value in that. Maybe not. But you'll never get another cent from me just to help you chase someone else's shallow dreams. There was a long silence, the weight of Max's words settling over the kitchen like dust. Finally, Caleb blinked hard, shoulders sagging just a bit. She misses you, you know, Caleb mumbled, voice quiet. Not the way things ended, but the way things used to be. Max let out a slow breath. Sometimes missing what we've lost is the cost of chasing what we think we want. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rift between father and son deep but not entirely unbridgeable. In that small, uncomfortable honesty, something shifted. A tentative beginning, fragile but real, toward understanding, or at least acceptance, in the ruins of everything that once was. Westfield's executives soon faced mounting frustration. Project timelines slipped. Costs ballooned as corrective orders and material shortages piled up. Local media picked up stories of unexpected delays and logistical hiccups, adding more unwelcome publicity to the already embattled cultural center. Privately, Westfield's director called emergency meetings, demanding answers that circled back again and again to a suddenly uncooperative local landscape. Their rivals, usually cautious, began swooping in to poach contracts and talent. Rumors swirled in dusty job site trailers and downtown cafes that maybe Max Blackburn had something to do with the change in weather, but no one could prove a thing. Meanwhile, Ryder's surveillance indicated Harrington was spending more time trying to soothe nervous stakeholders than managing the gallery. Lori, once so dazzling in her new social role, had grown visibly strained. At public events, her smile was brittle, and her eyes darted everywhere but at the cameras. That old confidence, so alluring back when it was shared with Max, had been replaced by uncertainty. Unused to being powerless, she found herself questioning whether she'd traded promises for illusions. For Max, each piece falling into place was both victory and punishment. He watched from afar as the grand plans that had cost him his family faltered, revealing how little substance supported the glittering facade Harrington had sold to Albany. Yet the ache in Max's chest lingered. This wasn't triumph for triumph's sake, but the harsh, necessary dismantling of a dream built on lies. Still, the battle was not finished. The city, his business, and even his son's future stood at a crossroads. But now, as winter deepened, Max realized the ground beneath his feet felt solid again, not because it was unchanged, but because every stone had been tested, every weak spot revealed. It was time for the final showdown, one last chance to see if truth, loyalty, and honest labor could withstand the biggest storm his world had ever seen. Max replied to Caleb's messages in kind, steady, supportive, never prying. Their exchanges became a quiet lifeline, a gentle reminder that, beneath all the hurt, something honest still connected them. Gradually, as the chaos swirling around them worsened, Caleb seemed to anchor himself in those small, genuine conversations. Meanwhile, Harrington became increasingly isolated. Once surrounded by admirers and social climbers, he now found invitations dwindling and allegiances fading. He doubled down, pressing Lori for introductions to new investors and asking her to petition Max one final time to sell Blackburn Construction to Westfield in a gesture of goodwill. Lori, weary and fraying at the edges, made the request with none of her usual conviction. Max declined with just 3 words. Not a chance. At a holiday party intended to revive the project's glamour, Harrington's fears were realized. A city official, nervous about the ethics inquiry, visibly avoided him. Lori, left on the fringes, listened to whispered conversations about failed plans and fading opportunities. Later that evening, after too much champagne and too little reassurance, she called Max from her car, voice trembling. "We should talk, Max. It doesn't have to be like this. For Caleb." Max interrupted gently, but firmly. "For Caleb, I'll always be there. For us, there's nothing left to salvage." The silence on the line stretched painfully. Then Lori whispered, "Happy holidays, Max," before hanging up. Christmas morning dawned snow-bright and cold. Max spent the day alone in his house, the home he'd built with hope and hard work, a quiet testament to what mattered. Later, he checked his phone. A single photo from Caleb, his old baseball glove, dusted with snow on the backyard picnic table. Max smiled, a soft warmth easing the ache in his chest. In spite of all that had fallen apart, a part of him felt rebuilt, stronger, steadier, and ready for whatever came next. Max considered Bennett's advice, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle on his shoulders. "I know, but I won't let Lori, or Harrington, profit from tearing our life apart. The terms stand. She can take them or face the consequences in open court." Bennett's voice softened. "You've played this smart, Max. Just be sure to play it fair. Courts respect that, and so will Caleb one day." "Don't worry." Max managed a tired chuckle. "I've always measured twice, cut once. I'm not about to change now." Hanging up, Max glanced at the snow swirling beyond his office window. Bitter memory mingled with resolve. The final phase was coming. One last storm before the skies cleared. He knew it wouldn't bring back what he'd lost, but it would preserve what mattered. His integrity, his livelihood, and a legacy Caleb might one day respect. That evening, with the city blanketed in winter hush, Max opened the boxes of holiday decorations he hadn't touched since the separation. For the first time, he placed a single glowing lantern in the front window, a quiet sign to anyone who cared to look that even through the hardest winter, some light would always shine from the home he built. Max nodded, his gaze steady, but not unkind. "Some years are harder than others." She hesitated, clutching her wrap tighter. "We never meant for things to turn out like this." He lifted a hand, stopping her gently. "You chose your path, Lori. No sense pretending otherwise." A flicker of regret moved across her features. "I thought I knew what I wanted. Maybe I was wrong." Max offered a small, genuine smile. "Everybody makes mistakes. Sometimes you can't fix them. It just matters what you do next." He turned his attention to the snowflakes swirling outside the glass doors, then back to her. "I hope you find what you need." Lori's shoulders sagged, resignation overtaking her defensiveness. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." "I believe you," Max said softly. "Take care, Lori." She nodded and turned away, her exit less assured than her earlier entrance. Max slipped on his coat, the crisp winter air outside invigorating him as he stepped out onto the sidewalk. The lights of the city sparkled against the snow, and for the first time in a long while, Max felt at peace, not because the pain had vanished, but because he'd discovered his own strength in surviving it. He walked away from the hotel, alone but intact, knowing that whatever storms still lay ahead, he was ready to weather them, stone by stone, step by step, on the solid foundation he'd built for himself, from the wreckage of the past. "I want to come home, Dad," Caleb said quietly. "I know I said things I shouldn't have. I was angry, confused. Mom fed me a lot of stuff that wasn't fair to you." His voice broke, raw with guilt. "I miss this house. I miss us." Max let the silence linger, weighing his son's words against everything that had passed between them. "You're always welcome here," he said at last, steady and true. "This is your home whenever you need it." Caleb covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. Max reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his son's arm. "Mistakes were made, by all of us, but you're still my son. That doesn't change." After a long moment, Caleb lowered his hands to reveal tearful eyes. "Thanks, Dad. I needed to hear that." "Help yourself to anything in the fridge," Max said, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "After you unpack, we can talk about what comes next. Together." The warmth that returned to the kitchen, though fragile, felt more real than it had for months. Father and son sat in the quiet. The cold outside held at bay by something as enduring as any foundation Max had ever laid. Love, given freely, despite everything that had come between them. No further negotiations. Standard child support for Caleb. You keep your gallery interests and whatever personal assets remain. You and Caleb are welcome here as long as respect is observed. No arguments or drama in front of our son. Any violation, and the arrangement ends immediately. Lori nodded, eyes downcast. Understood. No overnight guests, no contact with Harrington while you're in my home. If you need anything relating to the divorce or Caleb's schooling, ask directly. Otherwise, our contact will be limited to what's necessary. Lori swallowed hard. Agreed. Caleb, sitting quietly through the exchange, looked from one parent to the other, relief mingling with embarrassment. "I'll keep my room tidy, Dad. Promise," he said, forcing a small, wobbly smile. Max managed a brief nod. "That's all I ask." After dinner, Caleb escaped to his room, and Max retired to his workshop, letting the silence settle in the house that had once felt so alive. The winter wind rattled the windows, but inside, even this uneasy truce felt somehow stronger than the chaos that had held them all captive for so long. In the stillness, Max realized he no longer felt powerless. He was setting the terms now, building his boundaries, just as carefully as any house he'd raised from the ground up. Whatever the coming weeks held, for the first time in a long time, Max felt solidly in control of his own destiny. Max glanced at the screen, his expression unwavering. "You see now. The man you left everything for only cares about control and appearances." Lori shuddered, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was different. I believed I mattered to him. But when everything fell apart, he turned vindictive. I'm scared, Max. Not just of what he'll say, but what he might do." "You're safe here," Max replied quietly, taking the folder and flipping through the documents. Bank transfers, email printouts, event invitations, even notes on private conversations with city officials. It was all there, more thorough than he'd dared hope. "Thank you. This will help make things right, for the city, for Caleb, and for us. But remember, once this is over, you move forward. No more looking back." Lori nodded, tears threatening but kept at bay. "I understand. I'm sorry, Max." He met her gaze, steadier than it had been in months. "Sorry is for the past. What matters now is what you choose next." Caleb, drawn by quiet voices, appeared in the doorway. His eyes shifted from the papers to his mother's weary face, then to Max. "Are we okay?" he asked softly. Max placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. we're going to be, Caleb. It'll take time, but we'll get there. Together. In that moment, faint but genuine, hope began to thread its way back into their lives, fragile, but tougher than either of them could have imagined. Max called out, his voice steady but commanding, "Brody, stop right there!" Harrington jerked around, eyes wild and glassy, a canister still clutched in his trembling hand. "You!" he spat. "This is all your fault. You ruined everything I built. I had it all. St. Louis, Los Angeles, here. You destroyed me." Max took a careful step forward, keeping his hands visible. "You did this to yourself, Brody. I just refused to let you destroy my life and my family." Harrington's laugh was jagged, an edge of mania cutting through. "Family? You think you're some hero, building homes, collecting loyalty like it means something. It's all lies. They'll never love you, not your wife, not your son. They loved what I could give them." Max shook his head. Whatever they thought they loved, it wasn't real. It was built on schemes, and now it's over. You can walk away from this, Brody. Don't make it worse. Harrington staggered, looking around at the evidence of his failure, the unfinished walls, the soaked blueprints. For a moment, confusion and hopelessness flickered in his gaze. "I have nothing left," he muttered. Police sirens wailed in the distance, slowly growing louder. Max kept his voice even, trying to buy time. "You're not untouchable anymore. You can't buy your way out this time." A moment later, the red and blue lights flashed across steel beams and unfinished drywall. Harrington, stripped of his power, his audience, and the mask he'd worn for so long, dropped to his knees, the gas can falling limp beside him. The officers moved in quickly, securing the scene and leading him away, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. Max stood in the chill silence, the pungent smell of gasoline, a stark reminder of how close ruin had come to claiming not just a dream, but a city's trust. With one last look at the fractured skeleton of the cultural center, Max returned to his truck, his steps slow but certain. The night was still, the crisis averted, and as he drove home through snow-dusted streets, he felt, at last, the weight beginning to lift. The reckoning was over. What remained was the slow, honest work of rebuilding, not just structures, but trust, and maybe eventually, a future for himself and the people he loved. It is. The police moved in with professional precision. They handcuffed Harrington without struggle, patting him down and reading his rights as his defiance faded to a hollow stare. The gas can and the lighter clattered harmlessly to the floor, evidence of how close disaster had come. One officer nodded respectfully at Max. "We got your call. You all right here, Mr. Blackburn?" "I'm fine," Max replied, his voice steady, stronger than it had been in months. "I'll need a statement," the officer said. "But you look like you could use a few minutes first." Max breathed deeply, nodding. "I just need a moment." As the police led Harrington away, the once great art dealer cast one last haunted look back, the illusion of invulnerability stripped away. He disappeared into the flashing lights and the cold winter night, his empire of secrets and manipulation left in ruins. Max stood alone for a moment, the skeletal frame of the would-be cultural center looming behind him, unfinished and silent. It was over, not with fire and drama, but with dignity reclaimed and justice, at last, beginning its slow, sure work. He walked away from the site, each step buoyed by the quiet knowledge that he'd fought not for revenge, but for restoration, a true foundation, hard-earned, unshakable. And as he drove home through the falling snow, Max felt, finally, the beginning of peace. Max respected her effort, treating her not with affection, but with civility. They shared updates on Caleb's education and practical matters, keeping conversation courteous but never venturing into old, emotional territory. Caleb, meanwhile, had begun to resettle, his grades recovering, his circle of friends returning, and his distance from the chaos in Harrington's shadow helping him find solid ground again. The divorce, once a battlefield, became a formality. Lori, honoring her word, moved the proceedings forward quickly. She accepted the original terms, relinquishing any claim to Max's business and securing only what was fair and necessary for Caleb. Public sympathy leaned in Max's favor. His reputation in Albany, battered but unbroken, emerged with new respect for how he had handled the ordeal. In late January, as snow softened the scars of the abandoned Wellington Heights lot, Max received a letter of thanks from the planning department, commending his integrity and assistance during the investigation. He tucked it in his desk drawer, finding satisfaction less in accolades and more in the stability he'd reclaimed for himself and his son. One evening, as Lori packed the last of her things, she lingered in the doorway. "Thank you, Max, for everything, even this ending." He nodded, shaken but firm. "I wish you well, Lori. Truly." She left quietly, moving toward a hard-won independence. Max stood at the window, watching as she disappeared into the snow-tinged night, a part of his life finally at rest. He looked around his home, not the grandest house in Albany, but solid, warm, and wholly his once again. Caleb joined him, hands in his pockets. "You think it'll ever get easier?" his son asked. "It already has," Max answered, placing an arm across his son's shoulders. "Sometimes you have to tear things down to rebuild them right." They stood together in comfortable silence, taking in the quiet that comes after a storm, both knowing that foundations, if built strong enough, can weather even the harshest winter and hold hope for a new beginning. She gathered herself, voice trembling slightly. "I just want to say thank you, not just for the place to stay or helping with Caleb, but for being fair, even when I didn't deserve it." Max set down his pencil, meeting her gaze with quiet resolve. "I did what I thought was right. For Caleb, for all of us. That's how I was raised, and how I'll keep going." Lori offered a wan smile, tears glistening. "I hope someday Caleb realizes what that means." "I hope I do too." "He will," Max said softly. "He already is." She nodded and straightened, wiping her eyes. "This is goodbye then." "For now," Max replied. "But not forever. We're still Caleb's parents. That much doesn't change." With a final, grateful glance, Lori left the workshop. Max listened to her footsteps fade through the house that was once theirs alone. He found himself feeling something unexpected, not grief, not anger, but a cautious sense of peace. As the snow continued to fall outside, Max turned back to his blueprints, ears keen for the sounds of possibility and hope echoing through the home he'd built. One last time, but never for the last time. "That's not my way," Max said, sliding the signed papers back across the desk. "Drama makes noise. Noise draws shame. For everyone, especially Caleb. I wanted justice, not a spectacle. I wanted to be able to look my son in the eye when this was all over." Bennett nodded slowly, understanding. "You've done that, Max." Not everyone could. Max managed a small, tired smile. "I didn't win, Bennett, not in any way that matters for the heart. But I kept what was rightfully mine and showed Caleb what it means to stand your ground with integrity." "You think he'll understand all of it someday?" Bennett asked. "I hope so. He's learning for himself now, about loyalty, about character, about how nothing worth building comes easy or fast. With that, Max left the office, the newly finalized divorce decree in hand. He stepped into the bright, cold morning, feeling not lighter, exactly, but unburdened. The chapter was closed. Driving home, he took a longer route through the city, past sites he'd worked on over the years, each foundation a mark of hard labor, each building a testament to the quiet strength he'd always believed mattered more than show. Nearing his neighborhood, he resolved that there would be no more living in the past. Not for regret, not for revenge, not even for old hopes. That night, as he made dinner for himself and Caleb, Max glanced around his kitchen, the heart of the home he'd reclaimed. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was simply his, waiting to be filled, with new plans, honest conversation, and the beginnings of forgiveness, not for Lori, but for himself. Max understood at last. Sometimes the best you can do isn't what you first set out to build, but if its foundation is honest and it stands firm through the storms, then maybe, just maybe, it's built to last. Harrington sat in stunned silence as Max strode from the room, the faint echo of closing doors answering any further attempts at justification. For the first time, the man who had trafficked in half-truths and influence finally understood. He was not the architect of his story, but just another casualty in the wake of consequences he'd never thought to fear. Outside in the crisp air, Max felt none of the satisfaction he'd once imagined revenge would bring. There was no pleasure in Harrington's defeat, only a settling finality, a necessary balance restored. Whatever else might follow in the years ahead, Max knew he had done what he set out to do: defend his family, protect his name, and hold the line where integrity demanded. Driving home, Max considered the conversation. The line between justice and vengeance, the loneliness that came with unyielding resolve. He'd made his choice, clean and irrevocable, and the world had shifted because of it. There was no going back, and there didn't need to be. What mattered now was what remained: Caleb's future, the home that still stood, the hard but honest days ahead. Consequences endured, but so did the strength to build something better on cleared ground. As the winter sun set over Albany, Max found solace not in Harrington's ruin, but in the enduring truth that character, quiet, solid, and unshowy, was the only kind of foundation that could weather any storm. And with that knowledge, he drove on, eyes forward, toward the promise of a new beginning he'd forged for himself and those he cared for most. Caleb finally broke the silence. "I could see myself doing this someday, you know, working alongside you, not just as your son, but as part of the company." Max's eyes softened. "That's what I always hoped, but you have to want it for your own reasons. Build your own foundation." Caleb nodded, understanding. "I think I'm getting there." They watched as the first rays of sunlight glinted off fresh steel beams, a new beginning forged from the remnants of old ambitions, heavy with the promise of something lasting and true. Behind them, the city breathed with life, adapting, rebuilding, proving, as always, that solid ground is found not at the end of catastrophe, but in the careful, determined work that follows. And as father and son stood side by side, the past faded into memory, leaving only the work, the hope, and the resilience required to build what mattered most. Their story wasn't about revenge or even victory. It was about the endurance of honest labor, the quiet bonds of family, and the understanding that, sometimes, the most enduring structures are those rebuilt after the storm. But the silence felt earned, even peaceful, no longer the aftermath of betrayal, but the space where new things could grow. There were still echoes of everything lost, yet they no longer haunted him. Instead, they served as reminders of strength, hard lessons, and the simple power of endurance. Caleb's footsteps and laughter sometimes filled the house again. The sound of a ball glove cracking against leather, the low hum of honest conversation over dinner, the tentative weaving of trust. Laurie's calls, now rare, focused only on support for their son, and Max met them with respect, never bitterness. Evenings found Max drafting blueprints with steady hands or watching old sports games with Caleb, content in quieter companionship. The work outside was mirrored by the rebuilding inside, a foundation not just for business, but for what remained of family. And so, as spring came to Albany, Max Blackburn turned toward the future. The ground beneath him was solid once more, laid by his own measured persistence. The past no longer demanded payment, and the story hadn't ended in vengeance, but in the restoration of what could be saved, the enduring, steady construction of a life rebuilt with care, honesty, and hope. And that, he decided, was exactly enough. He stood there for a moment longer, savoring the quiet. The bourbon's warmth and his friend's words lingered, mixing with the steady knowledge that he had weathered the storm and remained unbroken. In every decision, painful or resolute, he had remained true to the values that grounded him. Inside, blueprints waited on his desk. Outside, Albany's skyline reflected promise and renewal. Caleb was charting his own course now, and even Laurie was finding her footing again. Nothing was exactly as it had once been, but what endured was stronger, balanced, and hard-won. Max closed the door behind him. There would always be storms on the horizon, always the need for maintenance and vigilance. But the house he had built, the life reclaimed and reimagined, stood on solid ground. The foundation held, and with that simple, enduring certainty, Max was ready to begin again. Not forgetting, not forgiving, but moving forward on ground of his own making. This is where our story comes to an end. Max Blackburn's journey had been one of hard lessons, careful choices, and unwavering commitment to his principles. He had faced betrayal, witnessed loss, and delivered justice, not out of cruelty, but because he understood the value of strong foundations, both in buildings and in life. As new days unfolded, Max stood steady. Not everything could be built back the same, but with integrity and resolve, he had crafted a future that was lasting and true. And in the quiet solidity of his home, with the city's lights stretching out before him, Max knew that was enough.